I've got my Great. Thank you. Well, first thing to say is thank you so much for coming. It's genuinely inspiring to be in a room full of people who clearly want to stop Brexit happening and also want to stop climate change happening as well. And so thank you all for turning out this morning. I think we're all here because we know that climate change is the greatest issue that we face in our generation. I mean, lots and lots of things are important. Brexit is important, but Brexit is temporary. Even if Brexit happened, things would be bad in the UK, they would be worse in Europe for a period of years, probably decades, but then history would move on. But climate change is of a completely different magnitude. If we don't stop climate change, things will never be the same again in human history. And I don't think we've ever faced a crisis, of this magnitude as a species before. It's impossible to overstate how important it is. So it is very, very good that you are here. Now, my job, I run Labour for a Public Vote. So the Labour campaign trying to get a second referendum and then to get Labour's campaign for Remain in that referendum so that we can stay and stop Brexit. I also run Remain and Reform, which is a small think tank putting together policy that I hope that Labour will use in the next referendum campaign. Because in the next referendum campaign, we can't say, let's go back to 2016 because wasn't everything great? Because everything wasn't great in 2016. We'd had 6 years of Tory austerity already. We were still suffering from the effects of the financial crisis. In the next referendum campaign, we have to talk about a positive future. And actually, the Labour Party can do that. The Remain campaign will simply be able to say, staying in the European Union is better than being out of the European Union. But it can't promise that anything will change for a better future. But in the next referendum campaign, the Labour Remain campaign, it can do that. We can say, vote Remain, keep the good things that we have in terms of jobs, workers' rights, environmental protections, but we can also promise that when people then vote in a Labour government, that we will change the things that people are angry about in terms of regional inequality, in terms of insecurity, in terms of it being hard to get a decent home or a decent job. So the next Labour campaign is, in the next referendum, incredibly important, and Remain and Reform is putting together some of that policy, though I know a lot of that is also being done in Parliament and by the PLP as well. But, I mean, a few things to say this morning. So, I mean, my job is to stop Brexit. I campaign to do that. If I wasn't doing that, I probably would be campaigning to stop climate change. But one of the reasons that I feel able to give my time to stopping Brexit is that I know it's so important to do this if we're going to have a chance of stopping climate change. So, I mean, there are a few things I want to say on that. The most obvious one, as Hillary was saying, is that we're spending all of this time and energy, years of all our political time and energy, to stop things getting worse, to stop our country turning into a far-right dystopia run by Dominic Raab, Priti Patel and Boris Johnson. And we have to do it because it's important for the here and now. And it's important for all the people that we're in politics to work with and to represent. As part of the Labour Party, we come into politics to make people's lives better. Brexit would make people's lives worse. I mean, this is why I cannot fathom why as a party we are not for Remain, because we know full well that Brexit would only make people's lives worse across the board, from top to bottom, apart from the small elites like Nigel Farage who can bet on the currency markets. But most of us don't live in that world. We don't want to live in that world. We just want to make ends meet and be able to pay the bills and do a decent job and bring our families up well. So, that is the number one thing. We shouldn't be spending all our time on this. We should be spending our time in a year where we've seen unprecedented fires in the Arctic and the Amazon, doing all that we can to suck the carbon out of our economy. But we're not. We're wasting time arguing with Boris Johnson and talking about prorogation and deciding whether the Prime Minister's lied to the Queen or not. I mean, it's utterly unfathomable, and we have to end this quickly. I agree with the taxi driver that Seb was with this morning. We have to end this quickly so that we can start tackling the real problems in our society. And amongst all the issues that are important in the here and now, climate change just goes above all of them. I know that you know that, but it's important. I mean, the second thing, I think, why I'm passionate about staying in the EU and why that is so important for climate change is that we know full well we can't fix climate change on our own. We are the 6th biggest economy in the world, but we're also tiny. We're tiny compared to the Chinese economy, we're tiny compared to the US economy. But as part of the EU, we can have a huge clout. The EU economy as a whole is bigger than China, and it's bigger than the US. And if we change things here, and if we're radical here, we can not only be a shining light and a beacon and an example to other people, we can also force other people, other countries, to do what they need to do. I mean, you'll all have seen in the news over the summer, the EU is in negotiations now with Brazil about a trade deal, and it's saying, well, we're only going to put this through if you take action to make sure that next year there are not fires in the Amazon the way that there were this year. And Bolsonaro is a climate denier. He's no particular interest in stopping people cutting down the Amazon rainforest for reasons I cannot fathom. But he is interested in money, and he is interested in a trade deal with the EU. And if the EU needs to use a stick rather than a carrot to force him to do the right thing, all well and good. We as the UK cannot do that. If we leave the European Union and we then go cap in hand around the world as we would then have to say, please do a trade deal with us, we are then, particularly with China and the US, the smaller partner, we will be forced into loads of things that we didn't want to do, which would affect the NHS, which would affect lots of things. But the likelihood of us being able to force Bolsonaro to do what he needs to do is negligible. It just wouldn't happen. So, if we want to stop climate change and we want to have an impact on a world that is still burning too much coal, burning too much carbon, and reacting far too slowly to the crisis that we're in, which the EU pretty much does take seriously, this is absolutely the best choice that we need to make. The third thing, and I think Seb and Hilary have also alluded to this, is that if Brexit goes ahead, we're going to lose any guarantees that we have on a whole range of standards and rules and regulations. And I don't know if you've read, and if you haven't, then don't. Dominic Raab and Priti Patel wrote a pamphlet, I think it was in 2012 or something like that, called Britannia Unchained. And it is the most terrifying, ludicrous, far-right fantasy document in which, it's deregulate everything and, crash and burn and, it is just horrendous, and you just get an insight into just how these people's minds work, and you realise they don't live in the real world. What they want is completely unrealisable, but if they try and implement it, it will do incredible damage to our country and to people's lives, and it will just remove all security from people's lives in terms of housing, job, pensions, wages, social security, NHS access. It's unfathomable how bad it is. It's almost worth reading as a comedy piece, but certainly do it late at night because you'd probably just terrify yourself. But that's where they want to take us. And if they take us there, the chances of us running an economy which is going to move towards lower emissions or zero emissions by 2030, 2040, 2050, whenever we happen to do it, is absolutely nil. They want to deregulate so the big business can do whatever it wants and increase their profits, and everybody else suffers. And the other thing that would suffer would be the environment, certainly in terms of carbon, but also in things that are just as important in terms of protecting biodiversity and protecting the soil and protecting forests. And all of these things feed in together. And we know actually that one of the most important things that we need to do to stop climate change is actually protect the environment that we have and then rewild parts of the environment as well. Grow forests where there were forests and there aren't any more, and make sure that there's biodiversity and in terms of animal, flora and fauna, so that, because all of that works together to suck up carbon and to make things better. The world grew in a certain way, and because we've swathed so much of it in pesticides and have bulldozed lots of it and concreted lots of it, its ability to cope with the carbon that we're pumping into the atmosphere is a lot less. And all of that will get a great deal worse. So, this is another huge reason why we have to stop what the Tories are doing. Which brings me on to the last thing that I want to say, which is that it's great that you're here this morning, but actually there are things all of us in this room can do. I think Hilary, Seb and I really are in very, very privileged position. We get to spend our day jobs working on this, and I get that most people aren't in a position to do that, but actually there are things that all of us can do. I've been so inspired by these guys, but also so inspired by Greta Thunberg, by Extinction Rebellion, actually, in the UK, and by all the different grassroots movements, and SERA as well, obviously. Goes without saying, SERA have been here for 5 decades. So a lot of us are quite late to this. SERA have had this down for 5 decades, which is quite a long time. But there's so many different movements to be inspired by. If you're not yet involved in one of these movements, please get involved. Coming to a seminar is great, but actually going out and getting involved in one of these movements, and partly because we know that they work. Look at the effect that Greta Thunberg has had. This inspiring young woman who is literally changing the world. But also SERA and also Extinction Rebellion, which has made a radical difference. I was hearing yesterday or the day before, I think, on the Today programme, there was an Extinction Rebellion person there, and it was actually Lord Stern as well, who wrote the Stern Report under the last Labour government, which was a very good document. But Lord Stern was there being, cautious and talking about, zero carbon emissions by 2050, and this is very achievable, and so on and so forth. And the Extinction Rebellion person just said, well, that gives us a 50-50 chance of getting to 1.5 degrees. So you're betting the future of humanity on taking a few more decades, a few more years. She's like, we need to do it now. And they talk about 2025. I've no idea if that's technologically feasible, but I want it to be. And even if it isn't, I personally think, if we put that date in the diary, it'll make us get our acting gear. You know, it's like an essay crisis. You know, when you've got the deadline, you then think, I'd better write that thing now. And I personally think we need a date in the diary that isn't 2050, because it sounds so far away. It will just make you think, well, we don't need to do anything now. We can start thinking about that in 2030 or 2035. And I certainly don't want to bet the future of humanity on a 50-50 stake. If you're going to get on flying is a bad example because we shouldn't be flying, but if you were going to get on a flight and the pilot said, it's a 50% chance we get there, there's a 50% chance we go down mid-Atlantic, do you want to get on? You wouldn't get on. Nobody would. But we're being asked to do that with the whole planet. If we go for 2050, it's a terribly bad idea. So I can completely see why Extinction Rebellion say 2025. But the other point that she made was she'd previously been a Green councillor, and she's now working with Extinction Rebellion. And the interviewer said, do you think you're making more of a difference now? And the woman said, well, when I was a Green councillor, you didn't have any interest in me, you didn't invite me on the Today programme, you didn't care what I thought. Now that we're making a difference by lying down in the road and stopping you getting to work on time and getting arrested and so on, you actually want to listen to what I've got to say. Exactly. Good for her. And this is where we've got to. We're living in a world where, I mean, maybe it's partly a generational thing, I don't know, or maybe it's just that governments care too much, just can't see beyond the status quo. You know, they're aware that climate change is happening. They're unwilling to make the radical changes that need to happen. And us, to be fair, I mean, people like me who stand in seminars and say nice things that are right, we don't always change things. But people like Greta who go and sit outside school on a Friday, and people like Extinction Rebellion that stop people getting to work on time, this is beginning to have an effect. And I think both with climate, but I think also with Brexit, we have to try things that are just a little bit outside the box and a bit more radical. All of which is to say, please get involved. Join us, join Extinction Rebellion, join SERA. These are things that you can do. The other great thing you can do, because we do live in a parliamentary democracy, much as Boris Johnson doesn't like that fact, we actually do. The other thing that you can do is, and I'm sure you did this already, but please speak to your MP, because most MPs, there's a few bad eggs, most MPs, certainly on the Labour side, actually are in politics for the right reasons and want to make the world a better place. But they need to know what you think. Partly that is because they are human beings. They've got people all the time telling them things that are terrible. Particularly, obviously, lots of Labour MPs, I'm sure all MPs, have got people saying to them all the time, we voted Leave, we want to get out. Or I'll never vote for you again unless you take us out of the European Union or whatever. Understandably, because they're human beings, that affects them, even though they want to do the right thing. They need you to get in touch and encourage them to do the right thing. Same is true with our MEPs as well. Don't assume that they are emotional automatons and are not responsive to the things that are around them, and that they don't need encouragement, because they do need encouragement, we all do. So please, please do that. But also tell them why. Tell them how Brexit would affect your area. Tell them how climate change would affect your area. Tell them about the people that you meet whose jobs are at risk. Tell them about the fact that your business might go under. They need that. They need that information to form their opinion. They need that because they need something to talk about when they get into the next interview. Our MPs need that internally in the Labour Party, because there's still an internal debate in the Labour Party about where our policy is. We might resolve that in the next couple of days. We might not. Even if we do resolve it, even if we do come out of tomorrow with a full Remain position, the argument will still continue in the Labour Party, and we still need all of our MPs actually singing from the same hymn sheet when we get to a general election campaign or when we get to a referendum campaign, because what Brexit offers is so horrendous, we have to do everything we can to stop it. So please get involved, is my plea. Thank you very much.